I'll tell you what. Again, I want to. Before I jump into the topic, I want to affirm what you guys have going here. Again, I just want to say it again. Hopefully, it sticks. It is really something very special. And I was talking to some of the leadership residents, and they were talking about their aversion. Like, I really don't like the term network. Let's forget the term network. You know what you have here? I think what you have here is friends who are on mission together. That's what you have. They're friends that are on mission together. Okay? And our affinity is Jesus and his mission, and we're determined to do everything we can to make that happen in this region. And so I'm telling you, this exact thing is the kind of thing that many of us are saying, this is exactly what we need to happen in like 250 cities across the United States. Because when that happens, that will change the cultural landscape of the United States. So what you're doing is not only important for here, but your example. Let me just remind, your example is also important for the rest of the country. So again, I applaud you. Good job. Keep it up. All right. Let me jump in. If this morning was really about multipliers, and I think that's a unique vision for every person in your church. Every person in your church ought to be paying attention to their internal world and also the external world. I want to take it up just a notch, and I want to talk about being a hero maker. And this is specifically for leaders. And when I talk about leaders, I mean, yes, you as leaders, but also anybody who has influence, whether it's a small group leader, a ministry team leader, a staff person, anybody who is a leader, what it really means to be that. I flew from Chicago to Atlanta and drove from Atlanta to Americus, Georgia to meet with a guy named Millard Fuller. Millard Fuller, if you don't know that name, Millard was the founder of Habitat for Humanity. And I had a couple of real estate developer friends with me, and we wanted to spend just 30 minutes with him because there were some specific questions that we had for him about what he had done. Okay, if you don't know Millard, he was a New York City attorney, left the attorney world to start Habitat for Humanity because of his passion, okay, for the problem of homelessness. And he wanted to fight against it. And we just wanted to have 30 minutes with him, a couple of questions. So we got to his office in Americus, Georgia, and the guy was super, super kind. He actually spent most of the day with us. He said, no, I want to show you. So he got us in the car and drove us around Americus, Georgia, this little town, and showed us a bunch of different Habitat for Humanity homes. Then he took us out to lunch. And after lunch, then he brought us back to his office. So we sat down at his office across the desk. I'll never forget this. He looks me in the eye and he says, don't you think everybody deserves a simple, decent place to live? And you could feel the fire in his body and it coming out of it. Don't you think everybody deserves a simple, decent place to live? And he spoke that as a visionary. I could feel kind of the adrenaline rush in my own body, and I'm going like, yeah, but how do you make that happen? Where everybody has a simple, decent place to live. And he began to explain his strategy. He said, in order to accomplish a vision like that, I knew I couldn't just be a carpenter. Because, being a carpenter, that's an important thing, but we would never be able to build enough homes so that everybody has a simple, decent place to live. And he looked at my two buddies and he said, I also knew I couldn't just start a construction company. Because a construction company, they would build a lot of houses, but not nearly enough so that everybody would have a simple, decent place to live. And then he kind of got really personal with them because they were both real estate developers. He said, I couldn't even be a developer because while you might be able to build thousands of homes, it wouldn't be enough so that everybody had a simple, decent place to live. He said, I had to figure out a way so that everyday followers of Jesus could learn to swing a hammer to build homes for people who didn't have homes. And that's exactly what he did. And if you ask the question today, who is the biggest home builder in the world? You know who the answer is? Habitat for Humanity. Biggest home builder in the world. Over 30 million. Over 30 million homes globally that they've built. Now I want to ask the question, so how did that happen? In many ways you could call that like a movement, right? It's a movement. How did that happen? Well, as I began to look more at the life of Millard Fuller, I think a couple things happened. One is Millard was determined that he would not be the hero of this organization. That he was going to make heroes of everyday people, make sure they swung the hammer and they got the accolades for what they were doing. And he also was going to make sure that everybody in his organization, that they understood their job was not to be the hero, but they were to be hero makers of everyday people who would swing a hammer. I want you to hold on to that story because I think it'll give us some traction where we're headed. At Exponential, an organization I have the privilege of leading. We've been doing some homework for the last several years on what we call kind of the organizational capacities of churches. And we'll throw this up here. I think we have that. There it is, 5 levels of church multiplication capacity. And for those, many of you have probably seen this, many of you maybe have not, but let me briefly explain it. We would say that all churches fall into one of these 5 levels. There's level 1 churches that are churches in decline. You're seeing less people on mission this year than last year. It's headed this way. Then there's level 2 churches that are plateaued. You added a few folks, lost a few folks, but basically you're at a steady state. You're just plateaued. Then there's level 3 churches. Level 3 churches are churches that are growing churches. You've added a few more people and you're starting this upward trend. There's more people really on mission and engaged in the mission this year than last year. You're a growing church. Now, I think this is a paradigm we really have to wrestle with, and particularly the influential leaders in this room. Most church leaders in the United States think there's only 3 levels. Either we're declining or plateauing, and the best we can do is grow. And so they pursue growing. How do we grow? How do we grow? How do we grow? I would like to suggest, this is what we're suggesting, we need a paradigm shift and begin to understand, no, there's actually level 4 and level 5. A level 4 church is what we call a reproducing church. A reproducing church. A church has ever started another church. But then we'd say level 5, okay, level 5 church is actually a multiplying church. It's a church that now is thinking in terms of 4 generations of reproduction. We heard about 2 generations, right? Father to grandchild and then grandparent, okay? We're looking at 4 generations of multiplication, like 2 Timothy 2:2 or Acts 1:8, Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, ends of the earth. 4 generations of multiplication. Well, as we began to do the homework on this, what we found is that about 30% of the churches would be growing churches, 35% were plateaued, and another 35% were declining. That's 100%. But of those 30%, particularly in the growing category, you have about 7% now, 7% that are now reproducing or multiplying. Most all of them are reproducing. We have very few in the United States that are truly movement multiplying kind of churches. Well, one of the things we began to do is we began to do the homework going like, okay, well, if that's the case, you only got 7% in level 4 and level 5, what are the characteristics? What are the traits? What are unique about the leadership in these level 4 and level 5 churches? In these reproducing and multiplying churches. We actually pulled together a think tank on a couple different occasions down in Atlanta again, just to really kind of hone in on that. We brought in some of the best and brightest people we could just to talk about. Let's take a look at these level 4, level 5 churches. What are the unique characteristics, particularly of the leaders in level 4 and level 5? We actually on white sheets, we had about 25 or 30 different characteristics, long list of things, some of them redundant. And we began to kind of look at all of those and mark some of them off. But I remember at one point, actually it was a guy named Dave Rhodes, it wasn't me. Dave Rhodes looks at it and he's like, you know what's consistent about these level 4 and level 5 churches? As he looked at all these characteristics and traits, he said, what's consistent is it's like the leaders aren't trying to be the hero. They're making heroes of other people. And he was the guy that then coined the phrase hero maker. And so we took that long list and we said, okay, how do we make this really accessible? And we pared it down to the top 5. And we said, here's the 5 essential practices of leaders that multiply other leaders. And in many ways, we began to look at that and said, you know what? This is exactly what Jesus did. Exactly what Jesus did. In fact, think about this. We'll throw it up on the screen here. In John chapter 14, verse 12, Jesus gathers together his closest followers. He looks them in the eye and he says this extraordinarily crazy thing, just wild thing. He says, truly I tell you, whoever believes in me will do the works I've been doing. No, in fact, you're going to do greater things than these. Imagine if you're in that group and Jesus looks at you and says, no, you're going to do greater things than these. Greater things than you've seen me do. Right? You're going like, what the? Greater things? And I think in that moment, I want you to think about Jesus' leadership style. I think what he was saying here, he's saying, listen, no, you're going to reach more people than I ever have during these 3 years. I'm going to show you how to take the gospel to more places than we have during my ministry. In fact, you're going to be the ones, you all are going to be the ones who are going to catalyze this movement that's going to go to the ends of the world, not me. In fact, you're going to write the best-selling book, the Bible, not me. In fact, you're going to have a greater impact than I ever did during my 3 years. And I think in that moment, what Jesus was doing is Jesus was saying, no, listen, the hero of the story, I'm going to make you guys the heroes. And sometimes I get pushback and they go like, oh, hold. And yeah, right, you're kind of giving me that. Hold, isn't Jesus our hero? Absolutely. I mean, he's the one who stretched out his arms and died on the cross. But I want you to take a look at his leadership style. I think in his leadership style, Jesus was going to make them the heroes of this thing that was eventually going to be a movement that would turn the world upside down. When I think about hero makers and what that means, let me kind of get contemporary on this. A guy who was a mentor of mine, who lived not too far from here, is no longer with us, a guy named Bob Buford. Bob started two different organizations. One was called Leadership Network, one was called Halftime. Leadership Network is an organization that was to do everything he could to make leaders, church leaders, successful. Bob used to say about Leadership Network, I was on the board for several years, he'd say, listen, we're the platform, we're not the show. We're the platform, we're not the show. With halftime, he would do everything he could to make business leaders successful. He actually wrote a book called Halftime. And he talked about the first 40 years of his life was the first half. And then when his son tragically died, it was a real reassessing of his life. And he talked about the second half, okay? He went from success to significance. The first half was about success, the second half was about significance. A guy who made a ton of money in the cable TV industry, but then began to devote everything he could to making business leaders and then also church leaders successful. One of my favorite things that Bob would always say, and you can take this with you, I think this is kind of the mantra of a hero maker. He would say, my fruit grows on other people's trees. My fruit grows on other people's trees. One of the things that Bob would always do too, he would have either in his front pocket or his back pocket, but often in his wallet, he'd have a 3x5 card. In this 3x5 card, he'd have a list of 10, 11, 12 names of young emerging leaders that he was intentionally investing in, both relationally and financially. And for a short while, my name was one of those on that list. And that's one of the ways that Bob moved from success to significance. And I think when he talked about success to significance, was really talking about going from being the hero to being a hero maker. Does that make sense? That's what I'm talking about when we're talking about being a hero maker. Another favorite story of mine is I'll show you a picture here. I love distance running. My kids are all distance runners. You know, this is Shalane Flanagan. And I don't know if anybody knows Shalane Flanagan in this room? Okay, Sue does. Oh, you told this story. Okay, well then for some of you who heard this story, we're going to get a little repeat because we both like this story. Shalane Flanagan is probably, over the last, 15, 20 years, the greatest female distance runner in the United States. In 2017, it had been, I think, 40 years since any female American had won the New York Marathon. Just won the New York Marathon. And Shalane Flanagan ends up winning the New York Marathon. And what's fascinating is the New York Times actually wrote up a story about her. And I just want to read this to you. Because again, 40 years since an American won it, she wins it. Because before that, it was always Africans that always win. First time an American won it, and they wrote this about her. It says, when Shalane Flanagan won the New York City Marathon last week, her victory was about more than just athletic achievement. Of course, that's a remarkable one, because she's the first American woman to win it in 40 years, and she did it in a blistering time of 2 hours and 26 minutes. If any of you run a marathon, that is unbelievable. But perhaps, check this out, Flanagan's bigger accomplishment lies in nurturing and promoting the rising talent around her, a rare quality in the cutthroat world of elite sports. Check this out. It said every single one of her training partners, all 11 women in total, have made it to the Olympics while training with her. An extraordinary feat. She goes on and says, they call it the Shalane effect. The Shalane effect. Can you imagine that? Tell me your name. Matt? Okay, yeah, Matt, yeah. Okay, imagine that, a Matt effect. Everybody knows Matt's up to awesome stuff. We just saw a great video, right? But they also know if they just get close to you, great stuff's going to happen for them. That's what was Shalane. We all know Shalane's going to the Olympics, but if you can just get close to her, get on her team, chances are you're going to go to the Olympics as well. They call it the Shalane effect. And it goes on and said this, you serve, now listen to this as a church leader, okay? Take this as a church leader. You serve as a rocket booster for the careers of the women working alongside you while catapulting forward yourself. It goes on and says, Shalane has pioneered a brand of team mom to those young and up-and-comers with the confidence not to tear others down or to try to protect her place in the hierarchy. Does that preach to church leaders? So good. So that was 2017. She wins the New York City Marathon. 2018 comes around, right? 2018 comes around. It had been, 33 years since any female American had won the Boston Marathon. Again, it was all Africans for 33 years, never an American. What happens? I love this part of the story. And you might go like, oh, well, the Shalane went. No, guess what happens? You know what she does? She actually goes to Des Linden. Des Linden was this other great American runner who always came in second or always came in third. I mean, she was phenomenal too, but never quite won the big one. Shalane actually goes to Des and says, guess what? Des, this is your year. They run the Boston Marathon. You go back and Google this. I mean, the conditions are terrible, just horrific. I mean, it's freezing cold, it's raining, terrible. People are dropping out of the race, Now, Shalane's actually, she's trying to win. They run the thing together. They run it together. They actually, so much so, they even made bathroom stops together. Of course, maybe that's like women, I don't know. Made bathroom stops together, right? Gets back out there, and on that particular day, Shalane she couldn't hang on, and guess, Des Linden goes on and wins it. First time a female American won in 33 years. Not only that, though, fast forward then to 2021. In 2021, we had the American Olympic trials. That particular year, for the female American Olympic trials, we had 500 women make the qualifying time, which was 4 times more than ever before. 4 times more made the Olympic qualifying time and made the trials than ever before. And the only thing anybody could point to that made any sense how that many women could be that good at something was the Shalane effect. And it gets a little personal for me because it was right during that same time that my daughter, Amy, came to me for the first time, and she says, hey, Dad, would you run the Chicago Marathon with me? And of course, when your daughter says that to you, you should say no, but I said yes. And we ran that together. See, I think that's what it looks like to be a hero maker. Does that make sense? I want you to get that kind of picture, get you in the picture. Because here's the deal. And think about Shalane. It's hero makers that create movement. And I'm not talking about Matt not being great. You're going to be awesome, but you're going to make sure you bring everybody with you. Everybody with you. All around you. Because your fruit grows on other people's trees. So then when we pared it down to these top 5, let me give you these really quickly, top 5 characteristics of hero makers. Here they are. We'll throw them at you. One is, go and do this with me, and I won't make you do it again, but I want you to do this with me so it'll kind of stick. The first one is what we call multiplication thinking. Okay, go ahead and point to your head. Multiplication thinking. You're going to start thinking differently. The second one, point to your eyes. You're going to start seeing the people around you differently. Hero makers do. Thirdly, put your hand on your heart. You're going to start giving people your life, okay, your life, and not just content. Fourthly, try this one with me, okay? This is what we call gift activating. Instead of asking God to bless you, you're going to bless the leaders you send out. Don't just bless me, I'm going to bless the leaders I'm sending out. And the fifth one, kingdom building, do like this, like you're counting, okay? You don't just count how many people are coming to my thing. We've already heard it today. But you're counting how many people am I sending out to do God's thing. And when you begin to do those 5 things, I'm telling you, that's the stuff of movement making. That's the stuff we see that Jesus did. Let me hit these really quick. Okay, this first shift, the first shift is how you think. You begin to think differently. And the shift in thinking is around multiplication thinking. And we see this in the life of Jesus. In Acts 1:8, again, I'm going to go back there. He casts this vision for taking the gospel to the ends of the earth. And he explains to his followers he's going to do it through them. 3 different times he uses the pronoun you. He says, you're going to receive the Spirit. You're going to be my witness. And you are going to go from Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria to the ends of the earth. I'm going to do this through you. Through you. I remember sitting in a workshop, and it was with Neil Cole. And Neil did this exercise where he said, I want you to take your current dream for your church. What's your current dream for your church? And at that point in time, my dream for my church, hear what I'm saying? My dream for my church was I was going like, man, if I had 1,000 people, in my church, that would be pretty awesome. I kind of thought maybe I could speak well enough to attract 1,000 people. And if I couldn't speak well enough to attract 1,000 people, I bet you I could administrate well enough that I could get 100 small groups, and that'll get 1,000 people. There was a way I could get there. And he said, what I want you to do is take your current dream for your church, 1,000 people, and multiply it by 1 million. 1,000 times 1 million, anybody? 1,000 times 1 million? Billion, right? And then he says, okay, I want you to figure out how do you make that dream happen. I'm serious. I would love for you to do that. Take your current dream for your church, and if the million thing freaks you out, just go 100 even, okay? Because all of a sudden, as I begin to process, I'm going, okay, 1 billion. I know I can't communicate that well. I can't even administrate that well. 1 billion, that's like 1/7 of the population. 1 billion, 1 billion, 1 billion. How would I pull that off? How would I began to realize, you know what? I'm going to have lots of leadership resonance. In fact, I would have to think in terms of probably even launching networks that would have leadership resonance. And man, I can't just stay within my little niche denomination. I'm going to have to work with lots of different people to get to 1 billion people. Are you seeing what's happening? See what happens? When you begin to apply multiplication thinking like Neil did right there for me, all of a sudden you have a dream so big, you get a dream so big that you know you can't do it without God's help. And see, I do think that's part of our problem. That's why this is the first step. You have to have a dream. Please hear me on this. You need to have a dream that makes you dependent on God. That makes you dependent on God. And that's what multiplication dream does. It goes, okay, man, I can't do this on my own. And then that leads you to the second practice. And the second practice is what we call permission giving. Permission giving. Now I said you start seeing the world differently. Again, Jesus did this. Jesus looks at this ragtag group of working class fellows. He says, hey, come follow me. Just come follow me. I mean, they never, ever expected a rabbi to see in them something worth teaching and worth investing his life in. And what he did is he eventually gave them permission to be more than they ever imagined. One of the things in the book we wrote on Hero Maker, we have a practice, but in each of the practices we also give you a tool. And I love this really simple tool. And if you haven't heard it before, we call it, here's the 4 most important letters of the alphabet for a leader. I see in you. To have an I see in you conversation. To look at, think about the students you work with. You're working with those students, and for you to sit down with them and go like, hey, I see in you someone who could be a church planter. I see in you someone, okay, who can make a big difference in the marketplace, and here's how you can do this. I see in you somebody, someone who can start one of those Jesus clubs. I see in you. I'm telling you, that is a game changer. And I bet you anything, the reason that many of you are in this room today, see if this doesn't resonate, is because somewhere along the way, somebody saw something in you that you didn't see in yourself. And they probably gave you a shot before you were ever ready. Before you were ever ready. And that's exactly what Jesus did, right? That's what we got to do. We give people permission to do that and have these I see in you conversations. So, And here's the thing, when you begin to have multiplication thinking, you start thinking really, dreaming really big, and you know you can't do it on your own, it forces you to see the people in your church, to see the people in your chairs and pews differently, going like, oh, I wonder how they could help make this bigger dream that God's given me happen. And it forces you outside of yourself, and you start to give them permission. And then the third step is what we call just disciple multiplying. Disciple multiplying. And that's where you begin to share not just content, you start to share your life. I mentioned this morning. If you go back to the Gospels, 73% of all of Jesus' activity was investing in the disciples, almost 3/4 of his time. And we have to kind of put that up against how are we spending our time. In John chapter 3, verse 22, it actually has a small little phrase there that says, and Jesus spent some time with them. Jesus spent some time with them. It's this phrase, diatribo. It's a Greek word, and diatribo just means to rub up against, okay? And that's what it means. It says Jesus spent time rubbing off on them. Jesus spent time rubbing off on them. I'll tell you, do me a favor, just the person next to you, just rub on them a little bit, okay? Just rub on them a little bit. There you, yeah. There you go, just rub on them a little. There you go, yes. It was pretty. It's kind of funny. I was doing this talk in England, in London, and you know how the British are. And I was like, diatribo, rub off on each other, and everybody just like this. Nobody moves. they're not touching each other. It wouldn't happen. It was funny. We flew to Madrid the next day, and so I'm doing this talk in Spain. I said, rub off on each other, and they're just like hung. It's like that kind of thing. It's just different cultures. The point I want to make, though, diatribe, that's what Jesus, he just rub off. And this disciple multiplying thing, okay, once you have this big dream, I know I can't do it myself, I have to be more dependent on others. You just start spending time with other people going, okay, how can I invest in you and help you make the Olympics too, help you become greatness, help you become all that God meant for you to be. Disciple multiplying, it really is. It's almost as simple as that. Help you do these greater things. And then eventually, and we actually give a tool called the 5 steps, which takes you from beginning to end on the disciple multiplying process. Then the fourth practice, hold your hands out like this. Let's do it again. I think this will be helpful. You go from God, bless the gifts that you've given me, to go, and God, bless the people I'm sending out. And we call this gift activation. Again, that's what, you see it in the life of Jesus. Matthew 28. Jesus is actually turning the leadership of the movement over to his closest followers. He's like, I have all the authority, and I'm going to use it through you. Now go. And he commissions them. I'm in the middle right now of, getting towards the end of an 18-month apprenticeship of a new lead pastor of the church that we helped start over 30 years ago. Ted Canaris. Ted is a guy who started as a leadership resident, then became one of our campus pastors, and then oversaw all of our locations, then oversaw all of our expressions, then joined our lead team. And about 15 months ago, I asked him, and we formally kind of acknowledged he would be what we call the lead pastor apprentice. And I've been doing everything I can to kind of make him successful. Last January, he showed up at our leadership retreat with our lead team, and I said, Ted, bring your vision. What's your vision? He laid out his vision for it, and for the last year, he's been teaching and preaching and sharing in a variety of ways that vision for our church. And all along the way, in different ways, I've been going like, yes, 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 endorsing everything I can to make him successful. Everything I can to make him successful. Sometime between now and May, because it actually formalizes in May, what's going to happen in May is I'm going to put hands on him along with the rest of our elders, and we're going to commission him, and then we're going to say, okay, now you go. You go. And in every way, I remember being in Nairobi with Bishop Oscar Muro, and he brought like 31 people up on the stage one Sunday. I thought it was the choir. It wasn't the choir. It was 31 leadership residents he had. and had everybody, go and just extend your hands like this. And he went and touched each of them and affirmed them, and then they prayed and they commissioned all 31 of them to go out and plant churches in the slums of Kibera there in Nairobi. That's what it means. We fully activate their gifts. They don't just continue to be your perpetual right-hand person, your assistant, your associate, okay, your co-leader, whatever it is, but instead you give them permission to go. And then the last practice, okay, is kingdom building. It's kingdom building. And instead of counting how many people come to my thing, how many people can I send out to do God's thing? Not just how many people come to my student ministry, okay? Not just how many people are showing up in my small group. Not how many butts do I get in these chairs, okay? But instead, how many people am I sending out to do God's thing? One of my favorite stories, and I guess I'll wrap up with this one. I was at our Yellow Box location. It's our largest location back in Chicago. And my assistant, Pat, comes to me and she says, hey, you got an appointment with Sam. And I said, Sam who? And she looked at her calendar. She says, I don't know, just Sam. And I'm like, I was a little kind of taken back. I'm like, Pat, you're in charge of my schedule. We're making appointments with random people I don't even know. She said, she's a tough woman. She was like, yes, and he's downstairs in the cafe. Go talk to him. So I went down there and I put on my pastor happy face, stuck up my hand. I said, hey, Sam, how you doing? And he shook my head. He says, doing good. I said, well, tell me your story. And he starts to tell me his story. Sam was from India. And he said, well, my dad started a mission in India about in the mid-'60s. And from the mid-'60s to about the mid-'90s, helped plant over 200 churches. And so now I'm going like, oh, wow, okay. I'm delighted to get to meet Sam, right? 200 churches, this is stinking awesome. And I said, well, what happened then? And he began to tell me a story about how his father suddenly passed away. And literally the last thing his dad said to him before he passed away was, son, don't lose the vision. It's an incredible story. Well, with that in mind, Sam knew he was supposed to take over this ministry. He takes over this ministry, and I said, well, what happened next? He said, well, we began to do things a little bit different. He said, the one thing I shifted was not only did we keep planting churches, but I asked each of our church planters that every year as you'd plant a church, you would bring someone alongside you that you would apprentice, and you'd train them to plant a church, and then you'd release them. And then the next year, after you release them, you'd bring someone else alongside you, you'd train them, and then you'd release them. So every year you were both leading your church, but then you're also planting a church. You're leading your church and also planting your church. Well, now I'm really fascinated. I'm going like, so wow, this is incredible. How's it going? Super low key. He's like, it's going pretty good so far. And I'm like, pressing, like, how good? He says, well, so far we've planted about 70,000 churches. I'm serious. I was blown away. And I think my reaction, somehow he thought I wasn't impressed, because then he pushes back and says, oh, but our dream is we want to plant 100,000 churches. And actually, since that time, they've gone well north of 100,000 churches they helped plant. But if you think about what Sam just told me, okay? Multiplication thinking, right? We want to plant 100,000 churches. Not how many people are showing up at his church. We talk about permission giving. Every year, right? In some way, they'd have an IC&U conversation with someone at IC&U, a church planter, right? And then they would do this disciple multiplying where they would, for a whole year, they would just kind of apprentice them. Every one of the church planters. And then in that year, they would say, okay, now we commission you go. You go. They're not holding on to them, they're commissioning you go. And then when I ask him, how's it doing, right? Kingdom building? Oh, we've planted about 70,000 churches. And I'm telling you, I am convinced that first talk we did, if we could get that into the lifeblood of all churches, everybody's supposed to be a multiplier, internal and external life, and then into all of our leaders, and particularly our staff. And let's be frank, especially our senior leaders, our senior pastors, if we can start thinking like hero makers and give everybody else permission, that could be a game changer for movement. And I'm convinced this is exactly how Jesus, if you look at his leadership style, that's how he operated.